Hey everybody, this is Mike Smiles with Smile Studio. I'm delighted to have Bill Fahili, who is a former theater director at Belmont University, and Mark Benson, who was faculty member for many years in human development and family science at Virginia Tech. Stuff that the older people are more willing to take risks of being out on the street with signs, but particularly on the street. The students were on the campus. And while the students were on the campus, the 80-year-olds were on the doorstep of where ICE had their headquarters in Burlington, Vermont, at a leased office space. And they were there with whistles, and they were causing at the exact same day that 4,000 kids were on a campus where they were safe. These people were putting themselves ready to be arrested. Well, local police came and they didn't arrest them, and ICE couldn't kick them out. And so they just stayed there until they got tired and went home.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I remember we we went to our No Kings demonstration, and when we got on the bus to go, I think the average age was 70. If you counted all the people there to go, I think the average age was 70. If you counted all the people there. That's an interesting phenomenon in that you have boomers that are recalling a time when they were more adamant about the political things, about the Vietnam War and other things that came into their lives, women's choice, civil rights. And yet to take up that mantle is great, but really it's the future belongs to that youth. What is it that they are looking for? Are they hamstrung by these algorithms? Are they so afraid to talk politically, or are they just simply not interested, that they've become so disenfranchised that they've ignored the political landscape?
Well, that's great. That's great ideas. I really do think the things that you point out, Bill, the war, women's choice, civil rights, women's choice is a perfect example. It got taken away from them this year or last year, and campuses have not been in revolt about it. And on the one hand, it surprises me. On the other hand, it doesn't, because there has been a concerted effort to suppress political voice among people. This trope that our country is divided and we're at each other's throats. Well, that's not true. That's only in federal politics and in the media ecosystems that they have created. It's not the case that you can't talk to your neighbor about all kinds of things. And there might be some sensitivity about things. That's always been the case. People can be sensitive to religion, politics, and money. But this idea that you cannot talk about plays to the side that wants to end discourse and put forth one particular point of view, which is nationalist, self-interest, the things that David Brooks is arguing against. His philosophy actually supported that all through. He starts out talking about the 2003 to the present, but he totally neglects what was happening in 1975 in the 80s, where there was this concerted effort to build a coalition among religion, politics, and was millionaires at the time. Now they're billionaires. But that coalition that got put together, it had a very strong propaganda message, was pretty successful. I'm not discounting that there are other things. I think the environment has gotten workplace environment for college students has gotten much more competitive. So they're aware that they have to be doing internships like for a month in order to get a job, and they need a good recommendation from Mike. And if it looks too political, that might not be a good recommendation for them. And I work with students' resumes, and I do play down some of the things if they're involved in politics. We try to frame it as a way that is more appealing to kind of either side, as opposed to something wow, this might be a radical.
So, so there, what you're saying in a way is that there has been an injection of fear into our political landscape and to what I think students are listening to. And it's also, to me, like you were saying, you used to be able to talk and you can't move from New York City to Nashville or another place and not understand the other side of the equation because you're dealing with people. You New Yorkers think, oh, we know about everything. And then you come down to a place like Nashville and you go, okay, now I understand this other side of where people are coming from. And you don't have to go far out of the city to see that even more. But you used to have some points of commonality, like you want small government, that doesn't interfere. You want states' rights, whatever. But this is like a sliding scale now. Like, how do you, like, where are you finding these points of intersection? Because you go like, well, I get it, Republicans are for state rights, but we're going to occupy you. But that doesn't make any sense. There's the emotionality of like, you either believe we're moving towards a more undemocratic, autocratic government structure or you don't. And so some people poo that and go like, well, come on. Really? We had checks and balances, but the balances and the checks ain't working too well. Yeah.
I think people have been lured into that since the 1950s, early 1960s, after the Second World War. Okay, so we had two terrible, horrific world wars in the past century. And the First World War was not solved, which is why the Second World War happened. And after that, there was a international consensus that we have to follow the rule of law, respect the sovereignty of other countries, have fairness in our trading. And it did operate in America too. And some of the customer is always right mentality that had developed fit with that. Now the customer isn't always right. You have to deal with the digital arm that is deciding how you're going to interact with this. And you really don't have. You might have some settings that you can change, but you really don't have control over the algorithms anymore. So there's a movement, I think, away from this sense of we can trust everything that we developed in the 50s and 60s. And Mark Carney, in his speech before Davos, basically said there's been a rupture in, and we've been playing along with it because America was powerful and America was mostly doing kind of fair things, not always. The Vietnam War, we're taking over other countries, and but we were generally, and we're exerting our financial power through our corporations in small countries. We were generally kind of, we weren't causing a world war. We've been without a world war since the 50s. So people have been lured into the fact we don't really have to stand up for our democracy. We don't really have to push back against propaganda too much. It's not that harmful, not that strong. And there are these both sides, states' rights versus federalism, those kinds of things. People basically kind of came to accept, me included, and not pay much attention to.
Right. Because there was part of the fabric you're saying of our society up until that point,
Yeah.
And when you talk about that period of the 50s, though, and stuff, which when I think of what this administration is doing, it really harkens back to like this time when, you could raise a family working at the gas station or whatever, which we knew happened. But we also have to realize that the competition was a lot smaller because we entered the war late. Other countries were decimated and we were in the golden age of economics.
Yeah.
It couldn't get better. It couldn't have been better. And then at that time, we're going all over the place. But I mean, it was a 96% or higher income tax on people, on rich people. Now, how do we get from there to today, where 96% turns into 30 some percent, trickle down, all this stuff? And then you were and going back to education, I'm all over the map. But when you were saying like the customer was always right, well, now when we go back to institutions of learning, there's so much money involved that students are the customer. And so they are running the show. You know, they didn't run the show when we were there, but there was an equitableness that you were like, okay, I'm buying into this. So this guy is my boss, or I'm going to question what he says, but I'm here to learn. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think people had a little more flexibility. Professors explored in their own way. And some of that was yes, they had to be concerned about their jobs, but professors back then were not making much more than teachers. I know because I went from being a teacher salary in Minnesota to taking a
Right.
professor position. And they said, "How much were you making there?" They were surprised I was making that amount, but they said, "We'll match that." And that was kind of the going rate.
Yeah. I,
Now professors, they have that job and they don't have a lot of other options to go to. And so the whole tenure thing is very much more
This
competitive.
is a subject I really want to dive into with you both. The choices you made to be a professor, the changing dynamics of education and the modeling of revenue for it.
no, I think that that's very interesting. And education over my lifetime has changed unbelievably. I mean, you were a truant. Somebody wanted you to teach you at home. They go like, no, you can't be taught at home. You got to go. You got to get your ass to school. But now kids are being taught at home, and the curriculums are all different. There's a lot of online training. You wonder about higher education, partly socialization, that we go to in that critical time of our lives, 18 to 22, as this kind of buffer between dealing with reality, which none of us want to do, and going to college and then drinking a lot and carrying on. But hopefully finding yourself through that socialization period. But is that necessary? You know, it might be more necessary now than ever because of isolation. I don't know. But what were you thinking, Mark?
One is just the very fact of bringing people together from different walks of life, different areas. That alone is radical because when you put people in contact with people from that are different, people learn. They become more understanding of other cultures, of their own culture. And that is one of the reasons why schools, colleges are very important for democracy. And one of the reasons why, if you see democracy as a problem, which some of the Republican elements in our country do see democracy as a problem, look what they're trying to do with voting rights. Then this idea of people getting together, sharing ideas, they're likely to become more liberal. The more you are exposed to more ideas, the broader the viewpoint. I've talked to a number of people who went into the ministry, for example, in different religious traditions. And one thing that stands out is when they come out from theological school, they are less dogmatic than when they first went in.
Right.
More views, they've been exposed to more ideas, they have a broader understanding. That's what education does. It gives you a broader understanding. And that kind of information can be detrimental to political organizations and power bases that want people to go in just this one direction and not veer from it. Yeah.
That's a really great point. And I think that's not just what's been out there, but culture changes societies. Politics doesn't change societies. Laws don't change societies. Culture changes societies. We see that a little bit with last night with Bad Bunny. I'm a big Bad Bunny fan, but you know, that that did more to a landscape, seeing that Hispanic influence there was tremendous. So it goes to what you were saying, Mark, but there's a fear, like, why are they taking over the Kennedy Center? Why are we suppressing comedians and all this stuff? Because culture, a strong culture is, and when people are exposed to that, when they're exposed to uh, people from a different faith who they really come to like, when they are exposed to someone who has ideas different from you, but then you realize that they're a good person. All these things, I think, come out of a broader education. And what we're doing is in this United States is we're dismantling public education and we're going to leave it for the dreads. I mean, we're just totally dismantling it. We're going to have these charter programs and these private schools and all this stuff.
Yep.
And what's left over is just going to be garbage in some ways. Yeah. It's just what's that?
Custodial education. We're just
Custodial
really-
education. Yeah.
They're there. They don't necessarily have to learn. They might get their breakfast. They might have some social services attached to it. But the emphasis on really helping those kids have a path forward out of poverty or out even middle class lifestyle is falling by the wayside as they
Right.
emphasize these other things.
And there are exceptions. There are exceptions, like some really great people that come to a particular place and can change one person can change the whole complexion of a school. And I've seen it, but it doesn't offer a lot of hope.
It's funny. I was just listening to Mark Andreessen, the founder of the internet or the Netscape and
Right.
billionaire investor. And he was just being interviewed the other day talking about his 10-year-old son, who is going to be privately tutored for the rest of his life, partly because of AI. And he talked about Alexander the Great, who was privately tutored by Aristotle, and the potentiality of generative AI and AI essentially to really focus the young people on exactly what they need to know at what time, and that there may be an opportunity for a lot more private education in the small groups. And I wanted to know what you guys thought about that.
Well, I'm a little suspect of AI because we don't know who's exactly controlling those algorithms to a certain extent. We know it's like, that just came to my head with Bitcoin. We know it goes in there. We don't know what the heck the mechanism is and the final analysis. Maybe it will bring opportunities for smaller educational pods or things of that nature. It does seem to me like it will always be a little bit of a purview of the wealthy, or at least for a time. These things, they don't get disseminated equally when they come to bear. But I don't know. What do you think, Mark?
I agree. And I do think that's the risk, is that if you educate, the narrower you educate, the more you're controlling, all aspects of the behavior. You could take, for example, military education. You want people to learn these particular skills. You want them to be aggressive. You want them to be on your side and against the enemy. And so to the extent that you are trying to have that controlled, I do feel sorry for the kid that is the child of a billionaire and is being trained in this one particular way of thinking that father tells the tutor and the tutor then does. You could take, for example, Donald Trump, his niece, Mary Trump, who has written about him, has said that he was basically institutionalized. He experienced this, exactly what we're talking about a very narrow education.
Mm.
What was the institutionalization? His older brother was a drunk, became a drunk, and then wanted to fly planes, and the father would not have any of that. His son, Donald, was a good talker, salesman. He put him out front and said, let's put Trump names on things. And he was very much narrowly confined to do this kind of behavior for him to be approved and for him to
Interesting.
be successful. And so the narrower you make people's educational experience, the worse it is for them. They need something else to go out into the world and understand what else is out there. Well, religions actually do that.
Yeah.
Want people to do that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a little bit what you're talking about is about mental well-being, the ability to empathize or the ability to broaden your horizons on viewpoints and things of that nature. The narrower the education, the less likely you could do that. Is that
Until you get into little cultural spirals that are self-reinforcing. This whole Epstein scandal, this guy was the masterful flirting with men, rich men,
Mm.
bringing them into understanding how they could shelter their money and also have this fringe benefit of these girls fit with the patriarchy. Boys come in and their money and they play with the girls. And then he gets some compromise on them if they're underage. And so that's a very narrow worldview that people can fall into. I do think we got to get people more out in the real world and interacting with people they don't necessarily interact with. I'll tell you a story about an exercise we did in class every year that was the most powerful exercise I've ever.
Love to hear it. Yeah.
Okay, so it's an interviewing class, right? So I'm not political. We're just focusing on people's skills and various techniques for how to conduct an interview, reflection of feelings and things. You can draw more from the person, and that was their goal, to listen. First of all, it was hard for students to do. They're naturally in this self-sharing thing. You share a little bit, I share a little bit. It's a very common college interaction. And so, first of all, just listening was hard for them to do. But once they did, and then they would write a report on these students, the students were first time, first generation college or below the 25% poverty level. And they were there for a Saturday. It's called Upward Bound. They would come and have a Saturday
Great
program,
Yeah.
volunteered to do it. And one of the common statements that the students, the the high school students would make is that they wanted to be somebody, which I always felt was kind of sad in a way because my kids felt like somebody already. Didn't have to prove it. But these kids really did. And when the college students would write up what the interaction was like, they would invariably say how impressed they were with these kids and sometimes reflect on their own life. And they're like, these kids are just beast as wanting to do something with their lives. Pretty easy. And I have a newfound respect for them. You don't get that. And I don't get that. When was the last time I talked to somebody that was poor? It's been a long time beyond a brief conversation. And so we're very siloed that way. And education is a way of getting us out of ourselves. So
yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. We just had a snowstorm here and we didn't have electricity for 6 days. And we were fortunate we had a fireplace that kind of kept us warm and you could cook and stuff. But the reactions when you read the neighborhood responses to these things, the first reaction is what an abomination this is.